She called me homeless until she saw what I did next. The locksmith on Cedar Street looked at Daniel like he'd asked him to rob a bank. "Sir, I can't just change the locks on a house that isn't yours anymore. The new owner's name is right here on the deed." Daniel stood on the porch he'd built with his own hands 22 years ago, holding a duffel bag that contained everything he now owned in the world, and listened to a stranger tell him he was trespassing on his own life. That was the moment Daniel Whitfield stopped being surprised and started being patient. And patience, as his daughter was about to learn, was the most dangerous thing a quiet man could have. 6 weeks earlier, Daniel had boarded a flight to Ohio to sit beside his dying sister, Carol. She had no children, no husband, and no one else willing to drive 4 hours to a hospice room and hold her hand while machines counted down what was left of her. Daniel didn't think twice. He packed a bag, asked his daughter Renee to keep an eye on things while he was gone, and left his keys, his mail, and foolishly, he would later admit, a folder of financial documents on his kitchen counter, the same folder he used every year at tax time. Carol died 11 days later. Daniel stayed another month to settle her affairs because that was who he was, the man who stayed, who finished things, who didn't leave loose ends for someone else to trip over. He drove back roads through 3 states to save money on tolls, slept in his car twice, and thought about nothing but getting home to the house on Cedar Street, the one he'd bought after his divorce, the one he'd paid off 2 years ago in full, the one where his late wife's rose bushes still bloomed every June along the back fence. He pulled into the driveway on a Tuesday afternoon, and a woman he'd never seen before was watering those roses. "Can I help you?" she asked, not unkindly, the way you'd speak to a lost tourist. "This is my house," Daniel said. The woman's face did something complicated: pity, confusion, a flicker of alarm. "I think there's been a mistake. We closed on this place 3 weeks ago." That was how Daniel found out his daughter had sold his home, while he sat in a hospice room 4 states away, holding his sister's hand as she stopped breathing. Renee didn't answer his calls for 2 days. When she finally did, her voice had the brittle cheerfulness of someone reading from a script she'd rehearsed in the mirror. "Dad, we need to talk, but not like this. Come by the apartment." The apartment, not come home. There was no home to come to anymore, and some detached, clinical part of Daniel's mind noted that his 34-year-old daughter had chosen her words carefully, the way people do when they've already decided how a conversation is going to end. He drove to the apartment complex where Renee lived with her boyfriend, Marcus, a man Daniel had met exactly twice and liked neither time. Marcus opened the door wearing an expression of practiced sympathy that made Daniel's stomach turn before anyone said a word. Renee was sitting on the couch with a legal pad in her lap like she was about to conduct a business meeting. Maybe, Daniel realized, that was exactly what this was. "Dad, sit down." "I'll stand." "Fine," she exhaled, the sigh of a woman inconvenienced by her father's grief. The house needed to be sold. You know it needed work, the roof, the foundation, all of it. Marcus and I found a buyer who paid well above what a fixer-upper like that usually goes for, and I used the power of attorney to close the deal while you were gone so we wouldn't lose the offer." "What power of attorney?" Renee's eyes flicked to Marcus just for a fraction of a second, but Daniel caught it. "The one you signed 2 years ago for the Medicare paperwork, remember, when you had the hip surgery consult?" Daniel remembered signing something in a hospital waiting room, exhausted, in pain, trusting his daughter because that was what fathers did. He did not remember it being a durable, general power of attorney broad enough to sell real estate. He suspected, with a cold certainty settling into his chest, that he never had. "Where's the money, Renee?" Another pause, another flick toward Marcus. "It's being used. There were debts. Marcus's business needed capital, and I thought, Dad, honestly, I thought I was helping you. That house was too much for you alone. Too many memories. I thought a clean break would be good for you. You thought selling my home without telling me, while I buried your aunt, would be good for me. Don't make this dramatic. Renee's voice sharpened now, the mask slipping. You're 61, Dad, not 90. You'll figure something out. People downsize all the time. Honestly, and here her voice took on the tone Daniel would remember for the rest of his life, flat and almost bored, it's not like you're actually homeless. You have savings. You have options. Stop acting like I ruined your life. I don't have savings, Renee. I have $400 in checking until my pension deposits next week, and a car with 180,000 miles on it that I'm currently living out of. Renee stood up, and for one heartbeat something like guilt crossed her face, and then Marcus put a hand on her shoulder and it vanished. Then I guess, she said, you're homeless. That's not my fault. That's not a crime, Dad. It's called being an adult. Figure it out. She said it so easily, homeless, like the word cost her nothing. Daniel looked at his daughter for a long moment, really looked at her, the way you look at a stranger you're trying to memorize, and then he picked up his duffel bag and walked out without another word. He did not slam the door. He did not raise his voice. He simply left, and something in him that had been soft and forgiving for 34 years quietly, finally, closed. Daniel spent that night in the back seat of his Buick in a Walmart parking lot, and he did not sleep. He thought instead, clearly, methodically, the way he used to think through problems on the assembly line floor before he'd worked his way up to plant supervisor over 31 years. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who solved things. By morning he had a plan, and the first call he made was to Gordon Massey, his attorney and one of his oldest friends, a man who had drafted Daniel's will 11 years ago, and who Daniel now realized had tried, gently, more than once, to talk him into something Daniel had always waved off as unnecessary. Gordon, it's Daniel. I need you to pull the file on the house. Which file? The trust file, the one you kept bothering me about. There was a pause on the line, and then Gordon laughed, not cruelly, but with the relief of a man whose advice had finally, belatedly, been taken. Daniel Whitfield, are you telling me you actually did the thing I told you to do 6 years ago? I signed the papers. I never told you, I forgot about them. Here was the piece of Daniel's life that Renee did not know, because Daniel had never told her, not out of secrecy, but because it had simply never come up, back when there was no reason to think it would ever matter. 6 years earlier, after a health scare that turned out to be nothing but had rattled him badly, Gordon had convinced Daniel to place the house on Cedar Street into an irrevocable trust, with Daniel as the lifetime beneficiary and a local children's literacy nonprofit, the one his late wife had volunteered for, as the eventual remainder beneficiary after his death. It was a common enough estate planning tool, meant to protect the house from nursing home liens and simplify things when the day came. Daniel had signed it, filed it away, and largely forgotten about it, the way people forget about smoke detectors until the moment they matter most. The house had never legally been his alone to sell. It belonged to the trust, and a power of attorney, real or fraudulent, granted by Daniel personally, had no authority whatsoever over trust property. Renee and Marcus, and whoever they'd found to help them forge or stretch that Medicare form into something it was never meant to be, had sold a house that was never theirs to sell. Gordon went quiet on the phone as the pieces assembled themselves. "Daniel," he said slowly, "do you understand what this means?" "It means Renee didn't sell my house," Daniel said. "She committed fraud against a trust, forged or misused a legal document to do it, and sold a piece of property to an innocent third party who now owns a home with a title that was never valid to convey in the first place." "That poor family," Gordon murmured. "That poor family," Daniel agreed, and for the first time since Cedar Street something loosened in his chest. Not triumph, not yet. Just the first cold clarity of solid ground. The next 3 weeks were not glamorous. Daniel stayed at a Motel 6 that Gordon quietly comped through a favor with the owner, an old client of his. He ate gas station sandwiches. He wore the same 4 shirts on rotation, washing them in the motel sink. But every morning he woke up with purpose, because for the first time in his life, Daniel Whitfield had stopped being a man things happened to. Gordon filed an emergency motion to void the sale and quiet title back to the trust. He also, at Daniel's explicit and calm instruction, sent a formal notice to the title insurance company that had underwritten the sale. Because title insurance companies, Daniel had learned overnight from a stack of library books, do not take kindly to closings built on fraudulent authority, and they have both the resources and the motivation to claw back losses from the people who caused them. The buyers, the young couple watering roses that didn't belong to them, were horrified and cooperative the moment they understood what had happened. They had bought in good faith, and their title insurance would make them financially whole, though the ordeal of unwinding a closing is its own particular misery. One Daniel felt genuinely sorry to have caused them, even though he hadn't. Their claim went straight to the underwriter, and the underwriter's fraud investigators went straight to the source of the funds. Renee and Marcus had used the sale proceeds to pay off a mountain of business debt tied to a failing food truck venture, and to make a down payment on a lake house neither of them had mentioned to Daniel. When the title company's investigators started asking pointed questions about a power of attorney executed for medical purposes being used to convey real property held in an irrevocable trust, a document Renee, it turned out, hadn't even read closely enough to understand, the story began to fall apart with the particular speed of a lie built on the assumption no one would ever check. Daniel didn't ask for revenge. He didn't have to. He asked Gordon for one thing only, the truth, documented, undeniable, and delivered calmly. 6 weeks after the day a stranger watered his roses and called him confused, Daniel stood again on the porch of the house on Cedar Street. The locks had been changed back, legally, cleanly, with a court order and a title company's blessing, and a formal, almost apologetic letter of restored ownership sitting in Gordon's briefcase. The rose bushes needed pruning. He'd get to that. Renee's car was in the driveway when he arrived, which surprised him. He hadn't told her he was coming. She was sitting on the front steps, and when she saw him get out of the Buick, something crumpled in her face that hadn't been there in that apartment 6 weeks ago. "Dad," her voice cracked on the word. "Dad, they froze our accounts. Marcus is talking about criminal charges, mine, Dad, mine, not just his. The investigators keep saying fraud, forgery. They're saying I could go to prison. They said the trust. They said I never had the right." "You didn't," Daniel said quietly. "You sold something that was never yours to sell. You just didn't know it because you never asked. You assumed the house was mine to lose, the way you assumed I was old and slow and easy to move past. I didn't think it would go this far. I thought Marcus said it would be simple. He said no one checks these things, he said." "Marcus isn't here," Daniel observed. "Where's Marcus?" Renee's silence answered that question completely. Marcus, it turned out, had left 2 days earlier, taking what remained of the lake house down payment and leaving Renee to face the investigators, the debt, and her father, alone. Daniel sat down on the porch step beside his daughter, the same porch step where he'd taught her to ride a bike 30 years ago, the same step where her mother used to sit and shell peas in summer. And for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "I called you homeless," Renee finally whispered. "I said it like it was nothing, like you deserved it." "You did." "I was wrong." "You were," Daniel agreed, and there was no cruelty in his voice, only a weariness that went bone deep. "But being wrong isn't the part I can't get past, Renee. People are wrong all the time. I was wrong to trust you with paperwork I never fully understood. I was wrong to leave that folder on the counter. What I can't get past is that you knew what that house meant. You knew your mother's roses were in that yard, and you decided your convenience mattered more than that, more than me, more than the truth. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice, and then you made another choice to lie to my face about it." Renee was crying now, the kind of crying that comes when consequences finally arrive after weeks of running just ahead of them. "What happens now? The house is mine again. Legally, cleanly, permanently, it's back in the trust, the way it should have stayed. The investigation into you and Marcus isn't something I control anymore. And I won't pretend I can make it disappear or that I necessarily want to. That's between you, the title company, and the district attorney's office. I told the investigators the truth when they asked me things. I didn't add anything, and I didn't take anything away. You could have made this go away. You could have told them not to pursue it." "I could have," Daniel agreed. "I thought about it. I decided against it, and I want you to actually hear the reason, not just the decision. It's not because I don't love you. I do. That part never stopped, even in that apartment when you called me homeless and meant it. But love isn't the same as rescue, Renee. I rescued you from consequences your whole life, laid out overdrafts, costs and loans, smoothed things over with your mother when you missed her calls for months at a time. I told myself that was love. I think now it was mostly fear of losing you if I ever let you feel the weight of your own choices. All that rescuing didn't make you careful. It made you certain nothing would ever really land on you. Well, something finally did." Renee wiped her face with the back of her hand, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller than Daniel had heard it since she was a little girl. "Do you hate me?" "No," Daniel said, and he meant it, though the word took more from him to say than she would ever know. "I don't hate you, but I'm not going to hand you a life raft I built out of pretending this didn't happen either. If you want to rebuild something with me, and I hope you do someday, when the dust settles, it's going to have to be built on the truth this time. Not a folder of paperwork you barely read. Not a power of attorney you used like a blank check. The truth and time, and you actually becoming someone I can trust with anything again. That's not going to happen this year. Maybe not for a while." He stood, his knees protesting the way they always did lately, and looked back at the house, his house. The roses overgrown but alive. The porch light he'd installed himself still hanging a little crooked after all these years. "I'm not homeless, Renee," he said, not unkindly, just as a simple correction to the record. "I never was. You just didn't know what I'd actually built because you never once thought to ask." He walked up the steps of his own home, unlocked his own front door, and for the first time in 6 weeks, closed it behind him without anyone's permission but his own.